From our family to yours, Homemade Homeschoolers presents the HMHS Podcast Network, bringing family-friendly fun and educational audio and video from the past and present. To find out more, please visit us at hmhomeschoolers.com.
The life of Abraham Lincoln has inspired the world. You've heard the ministers talk of his Christ-like deeds, the lawyers of his legal ability. I would like to speak to you as a sculptor knows Lincoln. We know what Lincoln looked like. We have this life mask taken by Leonard Volk, the Chicago sculptor, about 30 days before Lincoln's nomination for the presidency. This gives us the exact proportion of Lincoln's features. It is a difficult face for the artist because it is based on two curves. It not only curves from the crown of the head through the forehead and back into the chin, but it also curves off to the right-hand side about 3/8 of an inch. That makes the two sides very different. On this left side, it's stretched, giving it that firm, shrewd look that we associate with Lincoln's legal ability. While this side, the relaxed muscle produced the protruding lower lip, the droop in the corner of the mouth. This is the gentler side of Lincoln, the humanitarian and the philosopher. While we study the face of Lincoln, we would like to begin with this egg-shaped mask, because most human heads are egg-shaped. And while you watch this head develop, let us run over the events of Lincoln's life that changed this face. He'd come into Illinois with his family as a boy 19. He had helped them get relocated. He had cut the rails for the fence. He was now 21 and ready to go out in the world. When he was seeing the boys working in the wood lot, asked them to go down the Mississippi on a flatboat, taking a produce from that end of the country. The boys met Mr. Orford near Springfield as by appointment, but they found no flatboat. It was in the tree stage. Mr. Orford offered the boys $12 a month each to go out into the timber, cut the trees, bring them in, help in the construction of the boat. A month later, they were on their way down the Sangamon River towards the Mississippi. The trip down the Mississippi made a lasting impression on the young Lincoln. While there, the boys stayed in a boarding house directly across the street from the slave market. Now, Lincoln had heard slavery argued up and down all of his life, but he had never seen it in its worst form of men and women being sold like cattle. He is supposed to have said, "If I have a chance, I'll hit that thing hard." Little did this boy dream that he was a future emancipator. The boys worked their passage back by stoking the boiler of a steamboat. It was a wood-burning craft. When they ran out of fuel, they tied the boat to the bank, went up into the woods, cut more timber, and brought it down, and then chugged on for a few more miles. Getting off the boat at the port of St. Louis, the boys walked the 100 miles back to the little village of New Salem, where Lincoln had been promised a job as a clerk in the store which Mr. Orford intended to open there. Lincoln was disappointed upon arriving in New Salem to find the store also in the tree stage. He helped cut the timber, construct the two-room log cabin. The store was in the front room, Lincoln's living quarters in the back room. Lincoln had hardly gotten started at his merchandising career until the Black Hawk War broke out. The governor called for all able-bodied men between the age of 18 and 45 to report duty. Lincoln was with that group of boys who gathered in a cut-over field near Beardstown to organize and to elect temporary officers until they would be taken into federal service. You'd think that they were getting ready for a baseball game rather than a war. Lincoln, and a much older man, nominated for captain, sent to the opposite ends of the field. At the drop of the hat, the rest of the company ran towards the man under whom they wished to serve. Three-quarters of the company gathered around Lincoln. This was his first election, and it gave him more real satisfaction than any election he ever won, so he told friends later. Lincoln always referred to the Black Hawk War as a 3-month camping trip. He said he saw no bloodthirsty Indians, but he saw many bloodthirsty mosquitoes. He is credited with having saved the life of an old Indian who came into their camp by standing off the mob of militia boys who were all for lynching him. Returning to New Salem after the 3 months' experience as a soldier, he became a store owner. He and Mr. Berry formed a partnership and bought not only one store, but the contents of 2 others, which were folding out. There's no cash involved. It was only paid for in $1,100 of promissory notes. Lincoln, as postmaster, had access to all the periodicals that came in. He read the weekly Gazette before he handed it over to the addressee. No one minded. He also developed a habit of carrying things in his hat. When he saw the party to whom they were addressed, he doffed his hat and handed them their letter. This habit followed him throughout his life, carrying things in his hat. The Lincoln Berry store winked out, as Lincoln called it. Lincoln was too interested in the books he was studying, law and the classics, and they say Mr. Berry was too interested in the liquid stock. So pretty soon, the Lincoln Berry store had closed. Mr. Berry absconded, leaving Lincoln with the entire $1,100 indebtedness, which Lincoln called the national debt. 15 years later, he had paid off the last of the full indebtedness with interest. After the Black Hawk War, Lincoln had run for the office of representative of the state legislature. He lost that election, but he received all of the votes except 3 in the area in which he electioneered. So now, 2 years later, he tried again, and this time he won. In spite of the indebtedness for the store, Lincoln had no difficulty in borrowing $200 to get fitted out for the job in the state legislature in Vandalia. He always had good friends who had confidence in him. There was a distinguished group of men in that state legislature. Among them was Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant, as he was called by his admirers. This man was to be Lincoln's rival throughout his career, right up to the very door of the White House. Here, Lincoln learned his first lessons in practical politics. He was re-elected and served a second term. We should stop here and talk of the women in Lincoln's life. We know that he fell in love with Anne Rutledge, that she passed on very suddenly. It was a grievous blow to this boy of 23. He had what we would call a nervous breakdown. But his good friends, the Bowling Greens, took him out to their farm for the summer, where he had time to make an emotional adjustment and was ready to take up his work in the fall and go back to the state legislature. Yes, he had ears. If any feature of Lincoln's is too large, it's his ears, but we're seldom worried about the size of Lincoln's ears. He also had hair. It was coarse black hair, and a lot of it. It's usually in a disheveled condition because he had a habit of running his fingers through it before he made one of his famous jokes. Now there came to Springfield a young lady by the name of Mary Todd. She was a Southern belle. She came to visit her social elite relatives, the Edwards. She was much sought after by all the swain of the countryside, including Lincoln.